Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laser Focus. This is the deep dive pop culture podcast from Nerdist. I'm Kyle Anderson. Thank you so much for listening. Folks, this is the penultimate episode of 2024. And as we've done now, this will be the second year in a row because before that, we didn't exist. We are going to be talking about some of our favorite stuff of the year on movies and TV. This episode is, of course, the best TV of 2024 in the nerd sphere and outside. Like, we're normal people. We talk about some stuff. And to join me, I believe you were on this episode last year with me as well, is Nerdist editor-in-chief and all-around TV fanatic. You spent a lot of time watching specific shows this year. Welcome back to the show, Ro Rusak. Hey, Ro, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me. Yes, it turns out on average, I'm much more of a TV person than a movie person. I was just talking about it at the Mufasa junket with somebody else, and then they were like, "Oh, what were your favorite movies this year?" And I was like, "I watched them," and then I was like, "But let me tell you about all of my favorite shows." So, yeah.
Yeah, this will be, well, next week will be the movie episode with Mikey, and we'll talk more in depth on that. But like, I've definitely, it's a weird one because I'm always more of a movie watcher than a TV watcher. But I think in general, I enjoyed TV more this year than than a lot of the movies. Now, granted, I'm not a completionist the way I used to be. And I've spent a lot of this year just watching old movies, which is kind of my jam. But yeah, there's like, when I was going through movie list, I was like, nothing really stands out as like my favorite, but there was some banger TV this year, especially in our space that we got to talk about, and some stuff that was not good, which is fine too. But so
You
the way
can't
this
win them
episode's
all.
going, yeah, take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and then you have the facts of life. That's a TV theme song. Um, So basically, the way this is going to work, we each came up with our top 5 shows of the year, and we have compared notes so that we don't have any overlap. And we'll just kind of go back and forth and talk about what we liked about them and things like that. Some of the things on my list, I'm not sure you watched, and some of the things on your list, I don't think I watched. So it'll just be fun. And then we'll have some honorable mentions and just kind of talk in general. But yeah, let's start. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
I'm happy either way.
Great.
As a true Libra, I could go in either direction.
Okay, well then, why don't you're the guest. Why don't you go first? Give us your number 5 favorite TV show of the year.
Yes, amazing. Well, I think my number 5 favorite TV show of the year was the Avatar: The Last Airbender adaptation. I think I think I've come around to thinking about it like this, where I'm not 100% positive it necessarily stands alone as a show without sort of the cartoon version. But if you were a big fan of the cartoon version, the show comes in as like a really fun treat because you kind of get to spend more time with the characters you really like. You get to spend different time with the characters you really like. And the show having, real human people portraying the characters could go into sort of a depth of human emotion, which the show, like, as incredible as the cartoon is, and I think it is flawless, like, it's still a cartoon, and it just, some aspects of humanity are best conveyed on humans. So I think in that way, this series like did a really neat thing where it kind of comes as a really nice complement to the cartoon, and then you can take things that you really liked from the series and kind of retroactively apply them to your viewing of the cartoon, and then it kind of both sort of they each lift one another up, which I think is a really interesting sort of move for an adaptation. I don't know that that's necessarily how adaptations normally sort of function with their original counterparts, but I think it's a nice sort of mutual benefit here, and the people who really benefit are the fans. And I think Dallas Liu did an amazing job as Zuko, and Zuko is one of the like most complex, most loved characters that ever were, and I think he really captured everything fans love about the character in the cartoon, and then also sort of enhanced it for the live action. And I feel like I really like cried a bunch of times watching some of those scenes and some of the new additions that were put in that I think really enhanced that character in particular. So I think it was really good, and it can only sort of improve from here as we head into seasons 2 and 3.
Yeah, folks, if you want to hear a deeper talk of this, Ro and I talked about this earlier in the year, but yeah, I think one of the things that like really stood out to me was that the casting was like good, and they somehow did a really good job. Like I believe we mentioned, like the character of Aang is a really tough one to get someone to play believably and have the level of depth and also kind of childlike wonder, which the Shyamalan movie is inept in a lot of ways, but um that was one of the big things. Like, this just doesn't really feel like him. Not least of all that they said Ong instead of Ang, but whatever, it's fine. Um, but I think everybody did a really nice job, or at least a commendable job. I know people online were not particularly happy with what's his butt Sokka, but whatever, you're fine.
Yeah, I feel
Get
like
over it.
the first time I watched it, I wasn't totally sure, but then I kind of rewatched it after I sort of processed how the changes, the fact that it wasn't the cartoon and it was something different, and I liked all of it a lot more, including the parts that I wasn't like 100% sure about the first time through. And I feel like the second time I was actually like the story felt like it was captivating me in a way. Like, I felt tension. I felt like, "Oh, I want to watch the next episode." And, of course, that time around, I wasn't watching it also being like, "Oh, what should I write? Should I write about that? Should I write about that? Well, I have to
Right.
break that out." But, yeah, taking that sort of step away and, like, watching it again, I felt I enjoyed it even more the second time. So, I think that's a nice compliment you can pay a show.
Well, first of all, just wanting to watch a show a second time is a good compliment. But
Yeah.
but yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting. Like this year has been so long that when you started talking about it, I'm like, wasn't that last year? But it wasn't. It was just this year. So, yeah, that's a good one. I remember. That's one. You know this. I probably will not continue to watch, but I had a good enough time. Um,
Yeah, and I think it's sort of smart that they decided that they would film seasons 2 and 3 together, and that's kind of it for the
right.
show. So, I think that will sort of help them work out the kinks on like, "Oh, the characters are aging really quickly." I mean, the
Yeah.
actors are and the characters aren't. So
Hmm.
so I think that, like, knowing that now, you can really be like, "Okay, this will be good." It won't suddenly stop making sense. So I think that's another sort of nice element. And also, it will reach the end of its story, which, you just can't be guaranteed when you're going in for a show these days. So, all good things for Avatar The Last Airbender live action, a long awaited piece of media.
And at least people seem to like it enough that they're making more. That's the big thing about
Yes.
it. Number 5 on my list is I'm gonna say, so there was a couple shows that I legitimately really liked, that I was kind of surprised that I was going to like. Um, and one of those was something that we talked about fairly recently on the show, but Agatha All Along. I did not expect to really care that much about it. By this point, uh, the MCU shows has sort of lost me in a lot of ways. Like, there's just nothing, and it really just felt like a show about Agatha Harkness was like 3 years too late, and they really missed the ball on that one. And so I was not expecting much, and I will say that the first episode kind of, it was just like, I'm not really sure what this is even, but boy howdy, I really ended up really liking it, and it was like almost better week to week than it was. It didn't start out the strongest, but it just continued to grow, and the other characters were really great, and the other cast members, and yeah, it just had a really nice flow to it. You got to really like the characters, and it also did not, which is something I was worried it was going to do, it did not soften Agatha to the point where she was a quote unquote hero, but she was sympathetic enough. You understood a lot of her motivations. She was just a villain. Like, and I was really worried that it was going to be like like a lot of these, well, like Mufasa, for example, or what's the other one? Oh, Maleficent, where it's like these are
Mhm.
villains, but now they have motivation and reason, and aren't you sad that but they're not really that bad after all, and all this stuff. And it's like I don't like that. Just let bad, especially like comic book villains, like, or fairy tale villains. Let them be villains, for God's sake. Um, and so I like the fact that there's depth to her, there's like warmth to her, but she's hundreds of years old and she's done it by murdering people. So like that is not really something you can just like flip a switch and get over. And I thought Joe Locke as Wiccan was great. I think that was excellent casting, along with Haley Steinfeld as Kate Bishop. Like, are the only two so far young Avengers they've introduced that I'm actually like excited to see more of. Because everybody else, I'm just kind of like, yeah, whatever. No. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Ms. Marvel. In my head, Ms. Marvel is not a young
Yes.
Avenger, but she is. Like, whatever. It's fine.
Yes. And
Those
also,
three.
it just feels like forever since we've seen many of these characters
I
also.
know. Yeah.
Like
Yeah. I revisited Hawkeye because of they putting it out on Blu-ray and stuff, and
Yes.
so that one's fresher in my mind. I also just recently read finally read the Hawkeye book, and it's
Oh,
really good.
nice.
Um, one thing, and this is just true overall with Marvel, which I really appreciate, is that they will put out compendiums of comics to coincide with some of their movies and TV shows, which I think is really smart. And so when uh, uh, WandaVision came out, they put out the saga of Wanda and Vision and the Scarlet Witch, which is like a big just here's what you need to know about these characters in the comics. And then when Hawkeye came out, they did the saga of Clint and Kate, and it's just all of that series that they adapted. And then when Agatha came out, there was the saga of Agatha Harkness, and there's the saga of the Darkhold. And it's like, that's just cool. I'm glad they do stuff like that. So that way people can go, what do I need to read to understand these characters? Because Agatha Harkness has had a weird and varied history in the comics, but and also, I don't know if you know this, but Jennifer Kale, as played by Sashir Zameda, is got her start in Man Thing comics. And I only know that because I was at the time
Amazing.
reading Man Thing comics, and I was like, oh, hey, that's her. So
The more
anyway,
you know.
but yeah, I think we both agree that like Agatha was like way better than expected, and actually did a lot better for us on the site than I expected too.
Yeah, I think in a way, like, the idea that the Agatha show was 3 years too late almost, like, freed it to do what it wanted and not, like, what the MCU with like, not as, like, a piece of what the MCU needs to happen, but as, like, the show that is being made but isn't, necessarily in the right time or for the next thing or what have you, like, so I think that kind of gave license for weirdness that maybe other Marvel shows don't get to have because they have a specific purpose in a specific time that needs to, like, move the envelope in a specific way. And also kudos to them for coming up with another bop, which is not always a guarantee. The next song might not have been as good. Do you not like The Witch's Road?
I don't at all like it.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
They played it at a New York Comic Con party and everybody was, like, dancing. It was
I
incredible.
think in general, I did not enjoy it. I liked renditions of it. I thought the rock
Alright.
one from the 70s was a better version of it. And I think it actually really fit the 1600s, like that kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
but just when they're singing it around the floor
Mhm.
in the episode 2, I was just like, "Oh my god, this song is so." It's just I look, and
Fair.
this is a deeper
Fine.
problem,
It's
but
all good.
I do not like the way modern musicals,
Mm.
like
Sound.
modern musical songs. Yeah, and it
Yeah.
is that song, of course, is written by Kristen and Robert Lopez, and them and Lin-Manuel Miranda. I'm just sick of their styles, and so I just don't want to hear them anymore. And so
Fair,
so
fair,
that was my issues with that.
fair.
But
You
the
know
rest of
what?
the show I thought was great.
That's why it's number 5.
That's why
We
it's number
discovered
5.
it. The
Yeah,
reason
it was
comes
only that.
out.
And honestly, I think it's number 5 because like that's how good the year was for
Yeah.
stuff I really liked. Like I really
Yeah.
got into some stuff. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, but number 4 now for you.
Okay, number 4, we did cover this, but maybe it wasn't like the sort of typical item on our list, but I have to shout out to True Detective Night Country,
Mm,
which I thought was just amazing. It might actually be like one of sort of the objectively best shows of the year, but this is like our list of the best shows and like my personal opinion of the best shows. So even though objectively it might be better than some of the other shows, like I think just for me it's at number 4, but I feel like I had to say that so people know like that it's that good. And I think it really just it brought back kind of what people really loved about True Detective, that like solid sort of creeping supernatural feeling that like something is always about to like a shiver is about to go up your spine and some supernatural creature is going to tap you on the shoulder. And I think that other seasons of True Detective obviously did not fulfill the promise of the first season, but this was probably even better than the first season. Firstly, because it featured Jodie Foster and it did not feature terrible men making terrible choices. Uh,
fair enough.
which
It
is
ju-
which is totally fine. And obviously season 1 was amazing, but there were a lot of terrible men making terrible choices. And here there was like some fabulous women making terrible
yeah, I
choices,
was gonna
which,
say there's still terrible
was
choices being made.
more fun for me. And they also had that amazing character whose name I sadly cannot remember right at this moment, but he was a great man making great choices. And we always love to see like positive masculinity happening, especially in the true detective setting where that
Sure.
is rare. Um, but I just felt like it really captured its promise of like icy, scary, dark night of the soul vibes and like referenced horror movies like The Thing and like really was scary genuinely, and that's not always easy to pull off sort of on a consistent and building basis in a TV show. So I felt like it was just the kind of sort of folklore horror fantasy mystery that
Mhm.
I wanted it to be, and then I thought it was, like, tremendously acted, really well written, super interesting, and, like, I really like that it kinda does leave you hanging, like, was it magic? What happened? Where are they at the end when it's just the 2 of them? Like, are they in love? Those are all the questions that we have always. So yeah, I is another one of those shows that, did that happen this year? It sure did. So I thought I would give it that give it that nod because I think it's really hard to remember the shows that came early in the year after like so much great TV. But when I was like, what shows did come out? And I saw that name, I was like, oh yeah, that was
Mm.
good. That was like TV that I got the last episode. It dropped weekly, and I was like, oh my God, I need the next episode, and I need it now.
Yeah, I really like that as well. I think a lot of people online took against, first of all, anything women make, people are going to take
Sure.
against. Um, but initially, like the conceit was not a True Detective; it was its own kind of standalone thing, just called Night Country, and they put it.
Mhm.
And I think that might have done it a disservice. However, I do think more people probably watched it because it had the
Right.
True Detective name on it. So it was kind of a double edged sword. But it's so completely different in a lot of ways than True Detective, other than it's about two detectives. um, and weird, kind of almost like nigh on supernatural mysteries and stuff like that. I do think you're right. Like this one, more so than the first season, even like is like it is supernatural based. There is some
Exactly.
level of
Exactly.
mysticism involved that is not just in the mind or in the, as much as I love all the weird Lovecrafty stuff in the first season, I do think that
Yes.
it's almost too oblique. Like it's a great show. I'm not going to say anything about it. But season 2 kind of didn't work at all for me. And I confess I'd never watched season 3, although I've heard it's good. But to me, this is the one that kind of gets back to and even kind of surpasses the kind of mixture of grounded police procedural and supernatural mystery. As an X-Files kid, like I will always love stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you're right, it is legitimately scary at times.
Yeah.
The weird dream sequences are messed up. Like even just the lab itself is really creepy. Like, like
Yes.
there's just a lot of really great creepy stuff, and the cast is super excellent. Jodie
Ye
Foster, our friend, he's not our friend, but Christopher Eccleston is in it, and I thought he was great
Yes.
from
Yes.
Doctor
And
Who and The Leftovers and stuff. And
the man whose name I forgot was called Kavik,
that's
and
who I thought you were
he
talking
was
about.
so good. He was what a sweet, character that
Yeah.
I really wanted a happy ending for, and I actually think we didn't know if he got a happy ending,
Mm-mm.
so I think, I think we should know that, but shout out to his actor, Joel Montgrand, because, I feel like Kavik really added a strong, important element to the show, which was someone who's not a fucko. And
Absolutely.
and I
Yeah.
think that without that, it really would not have worked because I feel like although, I just railed against the terrible men, I feel like the women of this series were also quite terrible in their own ways, especially Jodie Foster's character.
Yeah.
And it did in different ways, but still like, equally flawed, which I think is again really great in a woman-led series. But I think it was nice to see that little bit of like light glimmering in a nice person.
Mm-hmm.
And I also just think that just the sort of setting of it in the sort of dark nights of Alaska when there's no day at all was really, really like successfully used because like what a scary phenomenon,
Yeah.
what an intense thing to just have darkness and to never sort of have that reprieve of light hit you. So yeah.
Yeah. It's that's obviously like they've done that with like vampire fiction and stuff like that, but there is just like the level of kind of madness that happens to people. That's why like
Yeah.
there's so much great like Nordic crime fiction and TV shows, because like when you're in the dark for that long, literally like stuff happens to your brain.
Exactly.
And I dig that. And even like the lab is underground even further, and so it's like there's
Yes.
even less light that comes in, and that's
Yes, and under the ice and just sort of that sort of scariness of, like, how can you find your way under the ice and in the snow and everything sort of looks
yeah.
the same when you certainly have no cell service. There's just this really intensely well done isolation happening on, like, several layers, that really worked.
Yeah. Good pick. My
Thank
number
you.
4 is not a show that we cover, and that's okay. um,
It
but
is.
it's a show that I really really like. And it's so we all sort of as a species fell in love with Ted Lasso there for a while. Um, and I thought the first season was great, and then the next 2 seasons were progressively less great. And so when I saw that Bill Lawrence and Brett Goldstein created a new show, I was sort of like, we'll see. And I really liked the first season of Shrinking, is the show I'm talking about. And it's about hurt people trying to make themselves better and trying to be good to each other, even though awful things happen to them. That's very relatable. Um, and then the second season is somehow even better. Like, it's not over as we record this. There's still a few weeks left, and
Mhm.
I'm still confident in putting it on my list because I'm enjoying it so much. I think the performances are all great. This is one of the rare shows where there's not one character I don't like.
That's
Um,
that's
especially in
bold
an
for a
on
show, I will
yeah.
say.
Yeah, an ensemble kind of show like this. And if anything, like I think the character and the performance is great, but Jason Segel's character Jimmy is the lead character, but he is the one who is like the one you dislike. If you're going to dislike anybody, it's him, and that's the point kind of, I think. He does stuff and you're like, "What the fuck are you doing, man?" But like that's the point. But in general, it's very funny in a way that like I think way too many what people call comedies are not actually that
Mhm.
funny. Like, we don't, this is not the time nor the place for this, but The Bear is not a comedy, and it should stop being called a comedy. So
Period.
that is a drama-ass drama that just happens to have light moments, whereas I think Shrinking is a comedy first that has heavier moments, and I think that, and that is, Ted Lasso did have that, and but there's like a silly whimsy to Ted Lasso that kind of grated after a little while. Also, the character Ted drove me nuts in the last season. But
Unfortunate
anyway.
in a show called Ted Lasso.
I know. It's like, can this show just continue and have it just be called Richmond FC or whatever they're called? Like, please, please, and thank you. But anyway, so I think Shrinking is excellent. Like I said, it's not over yet, but a little more than halfway through the season, I am confident in putting it on my list, and I think, obviously, the Golden Globe nominations are already out and they are a mess. But Shrinking did not get any love. But I think, like, this is Harrison Ford's best performance by a long shot. He's like actually trying, and he's really, because older actors, I feel like once they have personas, they just kind of phone it in, and
slip it in,
yeah. And I feel like Christopher Walken for a long time was that. He was just, I'm going to just be Christopher Walken. But then something like Severance, which is finally coming back, he's super good in that. He's like actually trying. He and John Turturro are in love, and I buy it, and I want the best for them in that show. But yeah, so anyway, I think everyone's super great, and I'm happy that I have a show that is not something we cover, because that is few and far between.
Yes, sir.
Who has time to watch things that we don't cover? Oh my gosh.
Yes, but yeah, we were talking about like compliments you can pay a TV show, and I feel like declaring it like one of your favorite shows of the year before it's over is like, that's one of the best compliments you could pay a TV show, because as when I was talking about sort of the movie versus TV thing, I was like, it's true, you never know when the next episode might come along and ruin your whole good opinion of a series, which is like the tension of TV, I think.
Very much so.
So it's good that the confidence level in Shrinking is that it's not going to do that.
Yeah. I will say the thing I don't like about Shrinking is the theme song. Same with Ted Lasso, which had a theme song I never wanted to listen to. This theme by Ben Gibbard, I'm just like, I just don't want to listen to it. But sometimes my TV doesn't give me a choice, and it doesn't have the little button pop up that says skip intro.
Required button, everyone.
Required button. There's a show later on my list that I never hit skip intro. I would watch every single time. So yeah, so we are on to number 3. Please give me your number 3.
Okay, I have to say that my number 3 and my number 2 and my number 1 are like, it's just a complicated, because I love them all, and I think they're all good in different ways. And ultimately, again, like I was just saying with like True Detective Night Country, like the sort of objective ranks and the sort of emotional ranks of them might not necessarily be 1-to-1. So I feel like, especially with these 3, like I feel like you could sort of interchange their orders, and it would still sort of be true for different sort of categorizations and like picking what is best in different ways. But all this to say that my number 3 show was Interview with the Vampire Season 2, which I thought was really, really amazing. I actually liked it better than Season 1, which some might consider sacrilege, but I do not. But also I'm not, and this is also something some might consider sacrilege, that in it for the Louis and Lestat relationship. So the fact that they were separated, which I'm sure if I were really there for that would have distressed me greatly, did not impact my sort of opinion of the series. I thought that they did actually a really good job, that even though Lestat wasn't actually present, of making sure that he was still felt through the sort of manifestations of guilt in Louis's mind. So I actually was like, I didn't actually feel like they were that separated, but they were present. But I think everybody delivered a really incredible performance, and I felt the story was really tight, and the sort of relationships were really messy, and it was kind of like a fanfic brought to life. And it is a fanfic brought to life, but you know, in in the sort of like, if you read fic, you can sort of understand what that means way, where it was just like everybody was queer, everybody was in love, everybody was being kind of messy. You'd have to be like, are they flirting? They sure were, you know, like everybody was kind of mixed into this just like messy pile of like polyamory and weird vampiric relations. And it was wonderful because I think more shows should really commit to all their characters potentially flirting with one another at any given time. Or killing each other. I think that really like adds a sort of heightened drama to any situation and just makes it more fun. Um I really loved Armand. He was my favorite.
Mm.
And I really loved Eric Bogosian's older Daniel. And I really hope that their relationship will come to fruition in the next season, because I think it would just be really cool to see kind of an older representation, not just sort of like a high young thing, like in a queer relationship. And it would just like, I mean, there's canon precedents, and if it were to happen, it would be my first canon ship to exist on a screen. So
Oh, that is something to applaud.
yes. So if you're listening, Roland Jones, they better kiss on screen, or I will once again be waylaid and very disappointed about it, because there is a younger Daniel, but I just don't love younger Daniel as much as I love older Daniel, although he's also very good. But aside from kind of the sort of queer romance aspect, which is really huge, like they really delivered some incredible episodes. And there was one in specific, um, which, oh my gosh, what was the exact name? I think it was Don't Worry, it's Don't Be Afraid, Just Start the Tape. And it kind of took us into this flashback, and it was just like really intense, and everybody was at the sort of top of their acting game, and it was just like really took your breath away when you were watching it. And so much of the series kind of almost feels like you're watching something like a play or something really literary. It's just like
Mm.
everybody takes sort of the craft of acting very seriously. And yeah, it pays off. So it's a good season and brought me into the fold.
This is not a show I watch, but I edit a fair amount of Eric is the dyed in the wool Anne Rice fan, and so he had a
Yes.
lot to say, especially before the show even premiered, about what was and wasn't going to work. And I think he's sort of come around on the show, as far
He
as I
has,
know.
yes, which
I think
I
he
think
really,
speaks to it,
yeah,
to its good season 2.
yeah. So yeah, I mean that's cool. And I, I was a theater kid, so like Eric Bogosian being in a show is like, hey, that's rad that they got him to do
Oh my
this.
gosh.
What is a kind of like a niche show on a niche network nowadays. Like AMC used to be the thing, and now they don't really. Now they're basically just do supernatural type shows.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's cool for him because he kind of started as maybe the sort of Eric Bogosian sort of character TM, but now, spoilers, they've turned him into a vampire, so now he's gonna be like, you know,
Yeah,
not just like sort of a grumpy old man, but like hey, I'm a freaking vampire, and already you've kind of got a sort of a taste of rock and roll Daniel Malloy, which I really love. I know it was contentious. I know people are like, it's too fast. It was just like, oh, but you know what? He turned into a vampire. Armand made him into a like. I could not have been more excited. I was like, it's all happening. And it was really amazing. So now I just hope that next season they don't mess it up. That's always my hope. But
yeah,
it's at that just sort of it's at that dangerous place where all the fans now have like a year, maybe more, to sit there and be like, here's how we would imagine what comes next. And many of those imaginings are like all very similar. And there's sometimes in fandom, there's this sort of this vision that sort of takes hold that the fans all share, but the series itself is not always clued into like this is the vision, and then may or may not enact that vision, and then it's always hard to get back to that real reality. So hopefully they're hopefully we're all still on the same page as we roll forward.
That is something that only modern shows really have to contend with these days, which is like it used to
Yeah.
be you would have a summer off and then the show would be back. So there was not that much time to kind of think about the implications of stuff or whatever. And then they would start again and like, but you're like these series that are short and then takes, there's a show that's on neither of our lists, but like took almost 2 full years to come out. Maybe it was exactly 2 full years, House of the Dragon, and it was just like, we even knew vaguely what was gonna happen, and it was still
Yeah,
like, people just had years and years to think about that stuff, so,
I
I think
agree.
it does kinda put shows nowadays in sort of an unenviable position, because if fans are really into it, then they're gonna start thinking about, like, especially if they're, like, active in the online community space, they're gonna talk about, "Oh, I think this is gonna happen," theorizing and whatnot, and that
Yeah,
doesn't
exactly.
generally help people out when they're trying to write a show. So they either will steer into what people think is gonna happen, even if it doesn't make sense otherwise, or they try to outsmart the people who have already figured out what's gonna happen, and that doesn't work either. So, um, let us hope that,
Let us hope.
let us hope that all shows have the strength of will to just pick a
Exactly.
lane and stay in it.
Exactly. Exactly. And, I just think I think Interview actually has a really strong sense of itself, and it's, like, sticking with it in a way that, like, engages the right people, and then everybody is kind of aligned, So
Mhm.
I feel that from it, and you don't always get that. I feel like sometimes shows just play around, or they start being like, "Well, what could we do that would be surprising or shocking or whatever?" And then that sort of never really works well, but just, like, sort of staying the course of what you're building and continuing to build on it, I think is, like, the true key to a good show, and I feel that happened in season 2.
Mhm.
Um, and I also like that the vampires are just, like, super crazy, kind of, like, they just didn't yeah, like, they weren't just, like, humans with teeth. They were, like, totally, like, insane monsters, and you don't always get that either, so I feel like that was a lot of fun, especially I feel Armand is just, like, cuckoo crazy. He's just, like, doing whatever. He has no boundaries. He's got no sort of specific morality, kind of. He just certainly is, like, doesn't understand himself or what he's doing or why he does it, and so it's just, like, that's a fun character because, like, what's he gonna do? Like, who knows?
Speaking of vampires and doing whatever they want, and also being completely free and open with their who they want to bone at all times. My number 3 show is, of course, the final season of What We Do in the Shadows on FX, which has been one of my favorite shows since it debuted. I'm actually sad that it's over or it's ending. And it's just as good as it always has been. Like the writing is super strong. It's focusing this season focuses so much more on the character relationships in a way, like, and specifically what I really like, you know, uh, uh, Laszlo and Nadja's relationship throughout the whole series has been so strong, and like they clearly are like, yep, we're in it together. We'll go have flings with other people. It doesn't matter, but we're still like as strong as possible. Uh, and that is like it's just so delightful to see on screen. Just like, and so this season there have been moments where like they've been having like fights or arguments or disagreements, and Nadja sort of thinks that Laszlo is like undercutting her at a lot of times and stuff like that. And then like it all gets resolved in a really nice way. This is a weird thing to say about a comedy about vampires and stuff, but like I just like the fact that I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show before, but I get weird politeness ASMR. Like that's like people chewing into the microphone never really does it for me. But when people are nice to each other on screen,
Oh,
it like I don't know why. Maybe it's because no one in life is ever nice to each other.
I love
Um,
that.
but like people getting along or like coming to a realization or telling each other stuff, like I don't know, that just really always gets me in it. So that's why like watching 24 when I was younger was really upsetting because nobody
Yeah.
ever freaking talks to each other. It's just like tell
Yeah,
them
I'm
the
like
thing.
Game of Thrones. Oof.
That
So
drives me
I
nuts too.
liked Rings of Power better in season 1 because actually Durin and Elrond spoke to one another, and I was like, "Oh my god, they had a conversation. They didn't just get mad. What?"
I know.
So
They
it's kind
actually
of like
talked it out. Yeah.
like that. Although it's funny, I was in Wicked the other night, and I was like, why can't they like be nice? Why can't the wizard have just been a nice fella? And everybody could have been nice animals. They could have had a nice life being the advisors and dancing. I was like, this then there wouldn't be, I guess, a plot, but
I guess
it would have
so.
been nice.
It would have been
I
nice.
just
Yeah. So
had that.
there's
I had that specific thought.
so obviously I know that conflict is drama. Like I get it.
Mhm.
And there can be conflict, but it's the way it gets resolved that I think
Mhm.
like separates stories and stuff like that. So anyway, that's neither here nor there really, but like this season really has like brought those two characters to the forefront, and those are my two favorite characters, so I'm like very pleased about that. uh I don't Nandor has been not my favorite character at times, and this season he's sort of lost, and I think that's really an interesting thing for him. He doesn't really know where he stands now that Guillermo is off on his own doing his own thing. He's got a job. He doesn't need Nandor anymore, even though he lives in the shed out back. um Stuff of that nature. And so yeah, and then there's like, Colin Robinson thinking that he can teach this weird Frankenstein monster that Laszlo made like to be more than just a thug. Like he's like, no, I can teach him to. It's there's just so much funny stuff in the season, um, and I'm glad that it got. I mean, it ended prematurely. I think that was no one was really expecting it to end, but they were given an extra episode, which as of this recording hasn't aired yet, to like wrap things up, which I think is really nice. So it's an
Yeah.
11 episode season instead of a 10. And yeah, so like it's been one of the funniest shows ever since it aired. um Aesthetically it is just like so pretty to look at. This kind of uh blacks and purples and greens like just looks so cool, and that's like their whole vibe of the house and everything. um and just like weird vampire stuff, and it's very gory and it's very sweary and stuff like that, and I just dig it. I just think it's such a great show, and I'm really happy that it lasted for this long. And I will look forward to rewatching the entirety of it when I get a box set. And I will get if they put it out on Blu-ray, I'm gonna buy it. That's my promise to you, FX.
FX, if you're listening. Kyle Anderson, you will
Yeah,
purchase.
look, physical media all the way, because
Yes. Oh, we
without
need
it,
it. Mm-mm.
people they'll just steal it from you.
We just posted today that you can't watch 28 Days Later anywhere right
No,
now,
I've tried for the
which
last
is
2 years to find it, and it's
crazy.
impossible, and I didn't realize it was, like, a thing, that it's just
Yeah,
not out there, so yeah.
it's just not out there, but it's coming to digital, but we're like, "Okay, bring it to physical, and
Yeah,
then we'll
man.
be really happy."
Put it on Criterion Collection, I'll buy it.
Yes. I haven't watched, What We Do in the Shadows because I'm not, like, a super comedy person,
Mhm.
but it does seem like a fun show, and I've heard only good things about it, really, so I'm glad it's going well.
Yeah. It is an out and out comedy, so if you're not, like,
Yeah.
really into comedy, like, I do understand maybe not wanting to do it, but it is also a very, like, violent horror comedy, which I think is really fun.
Yeah.
And there's ghosts and monsters of all sorts and stuff like that. So it's a delight for spooky fans as well as comedy fans. The
I
end.
love it.
All right. So
Perfect.
top two now. We're getting to the top two. I have a feeling I know what your number one is going to be. So
I
that
know, I know,
therefore means what your number two is going to be.
mhm. I feel even to the second, I was really oscillating between them because I feel in all fairness to Fallout was probably better than the Rings of Power. But I feel like the Rings of Power really captured my 2024. So
I'll
I
say.
feel I feel it must in the end be number one, if for
Yes.
no other reason than cognitive dissonance.
Sure.
But either way, it turns out it was a good year for Prime Video and myself. We really got along. And Fallout, I think, was amazing. I think it was just an incredible show. And honestly, I didn't think I would even like Fallout because nothing about sort of the construction of the card of the video game or sort of the gore of it or the war of it or the sort of they also seem to have this like horror comedy sheen to it, which is again
Mhm.
is not like this violent sort of, but it's sort of not silly, but like there's a snarkasm about it,
Mhm.
which is like again not when it's kind of gory
Is that a
in
thing,
that
snarkasm? Because I
it
really
just
like
made
that.
it up.
I like that a lot. We should put that
You heard it here
in the
first.
repertoire.
Yes. Um, this kind of irreverence, violence thing that is not really my thing, but I think the show just really hit a home run on everything it wanted to do. I think it was really compelling, really well acted. It was at times kind of gory and violent, but it was also like very heartfelt. I think like the characters were really human and you really liked all of them and you really kind of rooted for them even though they were all very different and sometimes at odds. And I think I think it did what I myself always would encourage an adaptation to do, which is not just like meekly sit in the shadow of its canon, but like step into it, accept that it is canon and do things. I feel like the show wasn't afraid to establish lore for the world of Fallout. And that's a bold thing to do when you have a video game or a canon with so many fans already and they're like, what is this sort of new thing, and why can it sort of decide things about my franchise? But I think when an adaptation is not afraid to do that, then it actually achieves much more and is inherently much better than if it's just like, oh, well, I'll just sort of reference things and have Easter eggs and just roll along with things that have already been built in other places. So, like,
Mhm.
declaring sort of how the Great War started. I was like, yeah, go off, declare how the Great War started. A big mystery in the game, and you're like, I'm giving it an answer in this adaptation. I was like, good, do that. Or I thought something really beautiful was like giving a meaningful backstory to like the thumbs up like Pip Boy and like giving sort of an origin story that meant something because now you're like you see that figure and you're like you have an emotional connection to the symbol. And I just like, and that also doesn't change anything in the larger canon, but it gives a greater shade of meaning to like a big thing that recurs many times. So I really thought that was just like some cool facets of the show and those are things I really enjoy when I watch an adaptation. Like I want you to do something and I want you to add meaning to like the other things and not just sort of emptily put in Easter eggs, basically. Um, and the cast, of course, was incredible. I think with a weaker actress playing Lucy, it just wouldn't have landed because I think Lucy would really needed to kind of have this sort of fluffy, naive thing, but then she sort of had to believably transform into like somebody who the scales have fallen from their eyes, basically. And I think Ella Purnell really, really crushed it. And kind of brought this heart to the show that wasn't annoying and then that believably became a more realistic part of this apocalyptic landscape. And of course, Walton Goggins, the ghoul, is like amazing, and everybody loves him, and they should, because he's a fabulous character. A character that's welcome in the row of tragic anti-heroes with with some kind of scarification, and and
Boy, that
tragic
could not be more
pasts.
true. Boy, that is really.
It's the truth. It's the truth. And I kind of knew I would like the ghoul, and then I did like the ghoul, and I think everybody liked the ghoul, and kudos to Walton Goggins for pulling off that character, kind of making him like this gunslinger, this gray moral character, but also again this glimmer of humanity. And of course we also see him as he was before, and he's a dad, and of course he's got a dog or whatever, and of course those are all catnip things for characters with tragic backstories to have. So yeah, I think it really delivered, and I had no expectations for it, and people loved it, and I think it's really rare for an adaptation to please the fans of the original really sort of unilaterally, and I think very few people had anything bad to say about Fallout. So
Yeah.
it's
I
pretty achievable. Big achievement, yeah.
it's this would have been on my list were it not on your list, basically, just so that we for full disclosure, I think
Yes.
Fallout is incredible. And it's it,
Mm.
so basically, like, we've now had two really, really good video game adaptations. Of course, with The Last of Us, and then now with Fallout. What I think, The Last of Us is great. It's
Yeah.
performed well. Everything about it is great. The changes that they've made from the game are interesting and like profound in their own way. But what I think that had an easier time, because that game is inherently as narrative focused as possible. And in fact, at times, the video game playing aspect gets in the way of the story, or is like a sidetrack from the story in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Whereas Fallout is all personal choice. It's all kind of, being kind of an RPG element thing. You can make your own character, and you can do whatever you want. There's all sorts of like choice involved. And so that is a much more difficult uh, thing to pull off, which is to make a strictly narrative show, which is what shows are, um, compelling across the board. And I've heard from people who play as Brotherhood of Steel were kind of maybe a little disappointed in the way that one was pulled off.
Maybe.
But as somebody who is not one, I don't care about the Brotherhood of Steel other than that they exist and they're an interesting faction just in the world. That didn't bother me at all. And I also think that stuff was like, I like the fact that we had these three different kind of good, the bad, and the ugly type of.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker for that. I mean, first of all, that's my favorite movie ever, but like just that setup is always going to be something I love. Where there
Yeah.
are these three completely different, disparate characters who have to come together in different ways and everything like that. I love it. And yeah, you're right. Like, Walton Goggins is so stinking good in this show.
So
And
good.
the fact that he is pre-war and post-war, I think, is a really fascinating thing to do, because obviously, if you know the games, ghouls are such a big part of the realm of Fallout.
Yeah.
But also, like, here's a guy who could have been in the vault and would have lived and died by now, like, and he didn't. And
Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating. And all the mystery aspects of like what are these weird vaults for
Yeah.
yeah, so I just loved it. And I loved like the fact that Michael Emerson was in it for
Yes.
not very long, and then his head gets blown off.
Point
It's
2
like,
seconds. That was
it
amazing.
was incredible. Like, I was like, wow, all right, I thought he was going to be like a main character, but nope.
Yeah. I actually think it's interesting because I would actually argue that Fallout's the show's narrative is stronger than the narrative in The Last of Us, which
You know
I
what?
feel
Yeah.
is just like sometimes sort of treads water, or doesn't like have a clear focus. Like they sort of went on
Mhm.
these sort of road trippy episodes almost, which is I sort of think it's interesting if you compare sort of the game structure and to sort of where they had to arrive. I feel like Fallout really arrived at like a narrative that was super tight, and then all the pieces like came together at the end, and it was like, oh my god, it's all coming together. I think speaking of Michael Everson, the worst mystery is a mystery that doesn't find a satisfying answer. And so having a lot of sort of reveals that actually like really paid off, was really a great part of it. And I will have to just say, like, Fallout has some of the most dense and like confusing lore that I've ever seen in a property. Like, we were like in there with like a magnifying glass being like, wow, this is in English. I have no idea
Yeah.
what was said to me here, or like who did what when. I was just like, wow, like learning that was like, so kudos really to them for taking that, like, and we've gone through many a complicated lore, but I really feel like Fallout was like a different level, and then just like distilling all of that into like something that played really well, even if you had no intense knowledge of every like detail of the games. I think it's really fascinating to experience that truth.
Yeah, it was really, it's really something. And like I was loving it every, and I think they did the show a disservice. I'm not 100% sure that they had faith in it,
Mhm.
being that they dropped it all at once. This would have absolutely benefited from a
Yes,
weekly
oh
release
my gosh,
schedule.
I forgot about that. Did they really? Wow, that takes me back. I can't believe that on hindsight. That seems nuts.
Yeah. It it was a mistake. They should not have done that. Like,
Yeah, well,
we
they won't do it again, I'm sure.
no, 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 no. But I understand why they were maybe trepidatious, because it's like,
Yeah,
this is a big swing. We're not 100% sure. I mean, Fallout is a big game, but like outside of gaming, like how do you sell that to people who don't watch
yeah,
or who've never played the game? And I watched it with my wife, and she does not play video games at all, and was sort of like, it took a few episodes for her to be like, okay, I think on board with it now. Like, she was just like, I'm not sure I know what's going on. And I'm like, okay, I
yeah,
don't I don't 100% think we're supposed to know what's going on yet.
right,
So
right,
that's an aspect of it. But I think they should have done the thing that they normally do, which is put 3 out
yeah,
at once and then do weekly after that. But, hey, that
wow,
is hindsight.
wow,
But
yes,
they could have had the conversation for so much longer than they did. But
yeah,
oh
oh.
well. Well, you've already mentioned your number 1, so I say go ahead and just do your number 1,
Oh,
and then
nice,
we'll
perfect.
do my top 2.
Perfect. Well, I suppose, my number one was The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power,
What a
which,
shocker! Oh my god, never would have guessed.
which, you know what? It should enjoy it while it lasts because Adar is gone. So we'll see where season three stacks up. No, I just maybe, but for me, it was a great season, except for when they killed Adar at the end, which was, a real oversight in my opinion. But we're not here to discuss how Adar's death was an oversight. We're here to discuss how, for several episodes, they gave me everything that I wanted to happen. And I really enjoyed all of the character dynamics this season. I thought that the acting was quite good in many storylines. I thought the new Sauron as Anatar and Celebrimbor really, really crushed it. And, their last scenes together are like devastatingly good. Like, when people are like, oh, it's award worthy. But like, yeah, I mean, I watched those and I was like, wow, this is acting. And also, they brought Galadriel and Adar together, which was something I really hoped for. And I honestly could not really have hoped for it to be as monumental as it was this season. So to me, that was a gift that I really enjoyed, and really like felt that all the character dynamics that I had hoped to see were sort of coming to light. It was a darker season than season one, and something I did really like about season one was that there was sort of lightness to it. But like we were saying, I guess people can't just be nice to each other forever.
Not
But
in a show about the War of the Rings, so sure,
I
probably not.
know, I know. Ugh. But yeah, but I basically like all the characters in the Rings of Power. So just returning to that world and enjoying sort of the dynamics together and getting to see characters grow and evolve. And especially, in the end, I feel like whether they intended it or not, Adar did kind of steal the show, and he was important in many important things and had a lot of, really emotional scenes, really intense scenes, things that I, would want for my favorite character. And I feel like he might just be one of my like favorite characters ever. So on the strength alone of my love for that character and the relationships he has on the show, it's just my number one. It's my fandom of the year, baby.
The heart wants what it wants.
That's right.
And you can go and watch and or read roughly 1 million hours of interviews that you did this year. So
Yeah, 2 more to come, but they were really good, so we don't regret it.
okay. But 2025, we need a break.
Yeah, I mean,
If nothing else, you need a break. Your brain
I
needs a
need a
different thing.
yes. I mean, let's hope some of these shows, Fallout season 2, let's go.
Let's go.
Interview with a Vampire. We could see you in 2025. Like, I believe in you. I would really want that. I do feel kind of that my series kind of have on years and off years. I'm like, this was my on year, and I'm like, this is all the shows I like. But now that
Yeah.
it takes 2 years to get the next one, I'm like, oh, now it's sort of the off year. Like, I don't actually know if there's something that I'm like, oh my god, I can't wait for that in 2025.
Well, Yellow Jackets is coming out next year, but
Yellow Jackets, yeah, it was season 2 kind of.
I did not like season 2, and in fact, the end
Yeah.
of season 2 made me angry. So I'm not sure I will continue to watch, but we'll see.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I would be just excited to see just what happens.
I'm more interested in
that-
reading what happens than I am actually sitting and watching, because I found it very frustrating. This is obviously
Yeah.
this is from last year, but like
Yeah.
Yellow Jackets season 2, like all of the stuff in the past was interesting, and all the stuff in the present sucked, and I hated
Yeah.
it. It just was like, why are we still doing this?
Yeah. I mean, I have to agree. I guess I'm excited for Walton Goggins and White Lotus, but that's not really a show we cover. So
Sure. No, that'll be another one that might end up on our whatever you want to call it, like on our list for next year, things we don't cover that we like.
Yeah. After Fallout, I feel like I'm just excited to see him in like basically anything because he just crushed it so hard. So
Yeah.
But yeah.
So
Cool.
for my number 2, this is a show, and I think both of these are shows that I had high hopes for, but also low expectations. Does that make sense? Like, I was sort of like, I hope this is good, but I will be prepared if it is not good, or if it is not my sort of cup of tea. So, and I don't really know why I thought that about at least the number 2, because of the pedigree of what it stemmed. Some version of that sense that's real. And so number 2 for me is The Penguin, which I've talked about many times. We talked about on the show, Eric and I. I'm a huge Batman fan, as you can see behind me. Ro, like, can see all of these Batman
I can see.
comic books and everything behind me. Love me some Batman. Also loved the movie The Batman. That was like my favorite movie of that year. And so like I loved everything about that sort of Gotham City world. But I was also like, do we really need a whole show about the Penguin? As good as Colin Farrell is in the movie, I was like, do we really need it? And I think I actually weirdly worked this into my review of Craven, which as of recording, I just wrote my review and just saw that movie last night, and guess what? Not good. But that Sony spent so much time trying to make a thing where villains have their own movies and own stories, and don't need to have the main hero there, and failed every time. And yet the Penguin did it. Like, there is nary a reference, except for maybe in the first episode, to the Batman himself. The entire thing is a crime story about the Penguin, his past and everything, and it completely makes sense why he would you get to know so much about him as a character, while again, same as Agatha, never making him too sympathetic to the point where he's now an anti-hero. Like, he's never not a villain, and yet we like him. And so there's an aspect of that. I got really tired of that anti-hero storytelling, like in the wake of The Sopranos and Breaking Bad and all those type of things. I like not rooting for the bad guy, because that's not the same thing. I don't think anybody roots for Oz in the show, and yet he's your main character, and he's completely like captivating, and you do want to keep watching what's going on. And the same thing with I think Kristen Milioti did get a Golden Globe nomination, very rightfully so, as did Colin Farrell. But Sophia Falcone is just like one of the coolest and most interesting characters on TV, and I was very pleased to see that they allowed her to be all the things. Like, she basically has the biggest arc in the show. And I loved it. And I dug everything about it, and like had Clancy Brown in it. I mean, what
Yes.
I can't dislike anything that has Clancy Brown in it.
That's the
So
facts.
and it really kind of like sets the stage for a lot of the like behind the scenes political stuff that will happen in the Batman Part 2, and I think that's great. Like, I'm super stoked about all of that. And I just think the Penguin deserves more kind of, if he was I was jazzed that he was even in the movie The Batman. And I think more than ever, like, it made me kind of like the character of the Penguin. Other stuff like did too this year.
Yeah.
And I also completely, for a video we shot way early in the year, like I think actually ahead of the Penguin coming out. Actually, now I don't remember when it came out. Who cares? But I watched all of the cartoon series The Batman from the early 2000s, and the Penguin on that ended up being like my favorite villain. So it was just sort of like, what an interesting year for me, kind of like getting to like the Penguin in a way that I never used to. Um,
It Yeah, I completely agree, and again, this is kind of like this is also a show that I liked a lot. I would definitely put it somewhere on my best shows of the year list, which is, like, honestly quite surprising to me because I didn't feel like, again, this was at all remotely kind of what I might go in for in a show. I'm like, the Penguin, okay. The crime, okay. Like, I just like nothing about it really like was calling my name that loudly, but I just thought it was like a tight, good, smart, interesting show. It had its story, it had twists and turns, it kept you in suspense, but was saying, when I was speaking to some of the cast, that it's like, they talk about street level heroes all the time. It's kind of like the street level villain, and they really stayed there. It was like kind
yeah.
of the best example of that kind of street level idea. Like, I was like, okay, now I can kind of like really understand what you mean when you're like street level. Like, I think that was kind of like is just a good example of that. And that's that like contentment with that story for the show, I think really allowed them to like lean all the way in. And I also kind of really liked that Oz was such like a mess kind of, and he like fronted to not be a mess and maybe didn't even think he was a mess, but he definitely was, and he hadn't established himself at all in the series yet, and he was just kind of like an underling to somebody else, and you're like, oh, that's unusual. Like, when you think, oh, a Batman villain, you're not like somebody's underling, you're established, but just watching him kind of maneuver and scheme and like
Mm-hmm.
decide to like continually sort of liquefy his way out of like just like fitting into sort of the next obstacle in his path to get where he's trying to go. Like, I thought that was really great. And yeah, Sophia Falcone was really amazing. So yeah, I had a great time, and I thought the ending was like, I think it just really hit hard the whole show, and
Yeah.
yeah, it was just a confident show, and it was doing what it was doing, and I think you just have to like that no
Mm-hmm.
matter what.
Yeah. And it like I said, it completely came out of nowhere for me, and like I dug everything about it. I think like having so many flashbacks to kind of give context for some of these characters, I thought was really smart. And I just love the fact that, so like in the comics, always, the Penguin is like, oh, as initially portrayed, like a robber baron type of,
Mhm.
he's like an upper crust. He wears a top hat and stuff like that. And
Exactly.
um and in later comics he becomes much more kind of like, he still has that affectation, but he's much more um very clearly a criminal and kind of ruthless. But what I really
Mhm.
like about it, I think it was Greg Rucka, who's a longtime comics writer. He described Penguin as Penguin is smarter than Batman, but he will always get in his own way. And I think that is really an interesting, not intelligence as far as like solving crimes or whatever. They have different
Yeah.
levels of intelligence, but like if Penguin really, really, really thought about it, he could probably outsmart Batman, but like he will never. He's so insecure about himself and his own place that he will never realize he's so much of a loser. He can't realize he's a winner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
So I think
yeah.
that's a huge thing about this character in this. And we saw it a little bit in the movie, The Batman 2, which is that like obviously he's the one who figured out the clue about Spanish. He's just like, you guys don't know how to speak Spanish? Like, come on. Like, and that's something that like a kid who grew up around the people, quote unquote, and not just a rich boy, like would maybe be better at like picking up on stuff like that. And I think that's really fun.
Yeah.
And like you said, like I love the fact that he's always like trying to play one side against the other and is always just like, hey, I'm just here to help you out, like that kind of thing. And like
Yeah.
people are like, this guy's a mook. I guess we'll just like let him. And then he does that to just completely take over. It's rad. I truly, yeah, this is, I'm very excited for the Batman Part 2, but I will probably rewatch the Penguin at some point because I thought it was so good.
Yes, yes. Completely
Um,
agree.
so all that's left is my number one, but let's do some quick shout outs to like honorable mentions. There's a number of shows that we watched. I will say that noticeably absent from my list this year, and it might be a surprise to you if you know me at all, is Doctor Who, which I did not think Doctor
It's
Who was all that good this
true.
year. So it,
Ah,
I thought it was half good, and that's not good enough when you have these shows that I think are all good.
exactly, and there were so many this
Mm-hmm.
year.
Yeah. Do you have any
Oh,
honorable
man.
mensch?
Honorable mentions. Um,
R.I.P. my menchies.
I know. Ugh. You know what? I feel like I'm, like, drawing a big blank right
That
at
is
this
okay.
specific
That is
moment.
completely okay. So I have a.
I'm
Go ahead.
oh, no, I was just actually checking to see, but I'm not sure. Let me see. Yes, okay, it did. It did air in 2024. I actually watched through all of the Dragon Prince not too long ago,
I don't know
and
what
it
that
had
is.
a season. Well, it is a sort of Netflix high fantasy animated series. It's really beautiful.
Hmm.
It's kind of maybe more in the sort of kids show sort of lane, but also like very dark. But yeah, it does sort of in conversation with other high fantasy quest stories, and there's big like a war between humans and magical creatures, and there's this really crazy like big magical god sort of figure who's just like fabulous. So we love him. And yeah, the characters were just really strong, and the story was really good, and there was just like some really really excellent sort of character development that sort of surfaces unexpectedly on many different counts. Like everybody kind of starts off sort of naive and childish, but like really evolve into like these sort of warriors. It's kind of in the Avatar like the sort of that kind of show tradition. That's the word I was looking for. It's kind of in the Avatar: The Last Airbender tradition, but like, would get along well kind of with the Lord of the Rings and other sort of high fantasy epics. So I think the next season is coming soon, like soon, soon. So I'm actually very excited for that. And yeah, so that's definitely an honorable mention for me, an unexpected fave.
Staying in the animation realm, my two honorable mentions are also animated. One of them, they're both in the same kind of ballpark. One of them is Batman Cape Crusader, which came out earlier this year, which I just thought was a really cool kind of new take on the old style of Batman, but with completely like new versions of the characters. Obviously, there was some controversy early on because the Penguin in that is a woman and not a guy. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It's completely different. Also, it's a completely different version of Harley Quinn, which I thought was really interesting. And obviously, it's not like realistic, because if this were really the 30s, like out queer people would not be all that beloved. But the fact that Renee Montoya and Harleen Quinzel kind of have a thing is really interesting, I think. And the fact that they do that is really interesting. And so anyway, I just really liked it. I liked a lot of the style. We did a whole episode about it. But it wasn't even my favorite animated show of the year. The other one is Creature Commandos, which is, I have watched all of it, but as you're listening to this, is basically just starting. It's only a couple weeks in. I think it's really an interesting follow-up to the Suicide Squad. It feels like that, basically, but with different characters for the most part. But I like, with the exception of the first episode, every episode after that is half continuing the story and half flashback of specific members of the Creature Commandos. And I love that kind of stuff. It has a really interesting, just a way to tell stories, and there's a different like aesthetic for each of them, these misfit characters. And the Bride of Frankenstein is cool as shit, so that was really fun. And also Dr. Phosphorus, which is not a character who's ever been in the Creature Commandos, but is a Batman villain traditionally, as voiced by Alan Tudyk. Like, he kind of became my favorite character, which is really,
I love that,
surprising. So that was really great, and continues to be really great. But far and away my favorite show of the year, when I was looking back, I'm like, yes, Fallout and the Penguin, I think, are perhaps more prestigiously great. But in my heart, there was no other winner than X-Men 97. That show, I have wanted good X-Men media for such a long time. There have been quite good stuff in, like, some of the earlier Fox X-Men movies I like. Yes. I think,
shout out to Pyro.
Shout out to your favorite person in the world, Pyro. Deadpool and Wolverine was fun and had a lot of good X-Men stuff in it. But like, legitimately good X-Men. I was very worried. This is an example of, I was worried that it's like, oh, we're going back to the 90s. Like, there's so much good X-Men after the 90s. Like, why are we going back to that? But really, it was more just like a direct follow-up to the cartoon from the 90s with the same or similar character designs, but so much better animation, like gorgeous animation, and really somehow even more deep and hard-hitting storylines, which are all right from the comics. Like, obviously there's remixing elements, and there again, I'm going to point to my shelves behind me. Look at all these X-Men books behind me. I love X-Men. So it was very much like, it was catnip, basically. And I was actually like surprised that they were going through so many like well-known storylines so quickly. They did Inferno, which I don't know if you can see. This book is Inferno. Yes. It's like 1,500 pages. Big. And they did it in one episode. Right? And somehow it worked. Like, obviously they cut out a lot of stuff, but like, because there's a huge amount of the Inferno story arc where the Goblin Queen literally takes over Manhattan, and it just becomes like this huge goblin world, which is kind of cool. But I think it was so great, and it was not just fan fiction, which is kind of what I was worried about, and it's not just like memba this kind of stuff. It wasn't all memba this.
Exactly.
And it actually like pays homage to the characters and did stuff, and it killed characters off seemingly, and it set up maybe the most ambitious second season or whatever of a show that could possibly happen, with 3 completely different, very weird storylines all going on at once. So there was, if I really thought about it, there was never any doubt in my mind that X-Men 97 would have been my favorite show.
I love that.
I think it's a masterpiece of animation. I think it's a masterpiece of storytelling, and I think it is far and away the best X-Men thing outside the comics that has ever existed. Better than the original cartoon by a lot, actually.
Yeah.
And
And
das
there
ist mein
you
number
have
one.
it. I love it.
Yeah.
So
So
many
those are
good
all,
shows.
yeah, lots of good shows. If you haven't watched any of these shows, although I doubt very many of you will have not watched any of these shows, but
There's a lot of
definitely
shows.
it's a lot of shows. Please give me you can write to me, laserfocus@nerdist.com. Let us know what your favorite shows of the year were. I think, are where would you have put all these shows that we talked about? But yeah, that's 2024. We got some stuff going on for 2025, but I'm not even going to look ahead. I don't even want to know. I don't even want to know it's coming out. That's for future us to worry about.
Yes.
Ro, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. How fun. My favorite thing, TV. May it continue to grace us with wonders untold.
Good. You brought it home. Ro, how can people find you on the internet should they choose to do so?
On the internet, the wide world of the internet. Well, much of my writing is, as you might suspect, on Nerdist.com. So please enjoy there. I'm on Instagram. I am Rotem_Rusak. On Blue Sky, I am. Let me make sure. Just
I know, I have to do that too.
Just Rotem Rusak. And I still have an account on Twitter, but it's less and less active as time goes by. There I am, Moondancer1626. And fun fact, I made that Blue Sky account to refer to my new Blue Sky account.
Perfect.
Just so you know, you don't want any confusion. You don't want somebody else to have it, and suddenly you're like, wait, is that Ro? But so I just made it. I was like, I'll also forever be Moondancer1626 on Blue Sky.
Now and forever. May it always be your epitaph.
That's right.
Yeah, you can find me, my writing, of course, like I just mentioned, my Craven review. I had a really fun time writing that review. Much more fun than I had actually watching that movie. You can find that on Nerdist.com. You can also watch videos that I think I counted, and I did like 22 or something videos this year, along with mostly Adam Murray, but also with Matt Caron as well. You can find those on youtube.com/nerdist. And you can follow me on Instagram, functional_nerd. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Kyle D. Anderson. I don't know why I'm different in every single place. I know why, because I don't think ahead. And you can follow me on Letterboxd to see my top, all the movies that I watched. I've put a ranking together of all the movies I watched this year. It will be updated now through the end of the year and probably into next year, if I'm being honest, when I catch up on more stuff. You can follow me there at Kyle_Anderson. All right, folks. Well, thank you very much for the penultimate time in 2024. Thank you very much for listening to Laser Focus. Join me again next week when my guest will be a different person. Bye-bye. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit Nerdist.com.